Conversations across time. 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 Conversations.
Welcome once again to Conversations Across Time, the show that gives you some information regarding historical facts, and we try to get the audience to the point that they have a better understanding of what is going on in the world today by an understanding of history. So you'll notice that we're a little different format once again, and this is a lesson that we have decided to interject between the episodes in which we discuss warm water and the Middle East, so that the audience has an opportunity to have as much information as possible in making a decision, or at least being able to participate in a discussion regarding world events that are happening today. So with me is the Conversations Across Time historian, and Mr. Mark Hoffman, you need to understand, has been with this show from the very beginning. He is a retired history teacher, and the amount of energy that he brings to this entire project is something that we've come to rely on, and we want you to have. So you're meeting Mark Hoffman in your own personality today.
Yeah,
you're not Dostoevsky. You're
not that,
You're not Karl Marx. You are or Pope Clement. You are here as you.
Yeah.
You want to give the audience some understanding of where we are, because when we left last week, we were having a conversation about a particular statesman.
Sure. Well, the last show, at the very conclusion, Vivienne was talking about John Foster Dulles and how he came to be Secretary of State, and I kind of mentioned that he was part of the Republican establishment, and that the party wanted him there so that he could follow the policy, strong anti-communism, contain communism, and we left off talking about John Foster Dulles, and I think Vivienne has a little more to say about him and his brother Alan, who was director of the CIA. And we'll talk about how he influenced what is happening in Syria and some other parts of the Middle East.
Okay. One of the things I want you to know about the Dulles brothers is that they were both subscribers to a term called liberal internationalism. And I'm going to give you the definition so that you'll be able to follow. Liberal internationalism is simply the belief that trouble in the world comes from misunderstandings among the ruling elites, not from social or political injustices, and commerce will reduce or eliminate this trouble. Now, if you were to take that definition and apply it to what you're hearing now from some candidates that are now running for office, it's right out of the John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles playbook. That the idea is for free trade, because business leaders will do what's best for the world because they know what's best for the world, and there's no such thing as social injustice. That's really quite telling. Think Donald Trump. There you have it. Think Donald Trump. So some history on John Foster Dulles. John Foster Dulles was, along with the influential publisher Henry Luce, John Foster Dulles helped spread the Red Scare hysteria in the United States after World War II. I'm sure that many of you know that there was a very dark period in the history of this country, right after World War II, when innocent people were treated as criminals. Communism was just, the Red Scare. I mean, that's essentially what happened, is that neighbors turned on each other, friends turned on each other, relatives turned on each other. If you were someone who thought that there was political injustice, and you need to understand that during the 1930s there was a labor movement in this country, and many people were members of the Communist Party. And the Communist Party's attraction had to do with working conditions and the fact that there was this great divide between the workers and the people who owned the capitalists. And so communism would be attractive. There was a depression going on. It just makes sense that a lot of thinking people would look at this political scheme and say, well, capitalism is not working for the majority of the population. So they were members of the Communist Party. Did they intend to overthrow the government of the United States? Never. That was never. But the Red Scare was something that if you were accused of being a pinko, and I think, Mark, you and I were talking about this.
We were. In fact, when I was hired by the Philadelphia School District in 1964,
Okay.
I had to sign a loyalty oath. And the loyalty oath said, I am now or never have been a member of the Communist Party. And you had to sign that
In order
oath
to be employed.
Yes. So that was, and the Red Scare had already started to go down a little bit. It wasn't over yet, but I still had to sign that loyalty oath.
And so many people were involved and mistreated by the United States government. I mean, that's another show altogether, but we would talk about the hearings of the House Un-American Activities Committee and some of the things that they did, and they actually terrorized this country, terrorized Hollywood. There is a film that's out, and it may be on DVD by the time that you see this show, but I want you to, if you can, watch the movie Trumbo, because it gives a very interesting perspective in terms of what was happening and the hysteria that was happening in this country. And a lot of those people that you feel that were legends and movie heroes were some very despicable people.
And Vivienne, that's a very good point, because the paranoia here led to decisions in foreign policy
Yes.
that perhaps we're still paying for today.
Yes.
And minus the paranoia, we might have made more sane, using that word in quotes, decisions, and we would not be in some of the situations we are today. So that's a very good point. You can't divorce what's going on inside the country from the foreign policy. So that's a very good point.
I mean, in fact, let me give you a definition by someone that I respect. Red Scare was a nationwide anti-radical hysteria provoked by a mounting fear and anxiety that a Bolshevik revolution in America was imminent, a revolution that would change church, home, marriage, civility, and the American way of life. I wish I'd said those words, but those words were said by Murray B. Levin, who was a political scientist and a former member of the Communist Party, because as I said earlier, lots of people were. So this Red Scare led to a U.S. policy of intervention in the overthrow of a number of democratically elected governments that the United States defined as communist. And they were defined as communist by John Foster Dulles and his brothers. And Vietnam, the whole notion that we were even in Vietnam to defeat communism, which was never the case. Whatever socialist leanings were going on in Vietnam had to do with trying to justify and trying to take care of the people of Vietnam. Yet, many of us, I am related to someone, lost someone fighting for a war in Vietnam, and this was all policies of John Foster Dulles and his brother. Now, what's interesting also is that you think about today what you hear about governmental officials and how they're called to task for influence peddling. John Foster Dulles and his brother Alan became rich using their government positions to advance their own interests and the interests of their law clients. Because I mentioned to you earlier that last week I mentioned that John Foster Dulles was managing partner at the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell. His brother Alan was also an attorney with Sullivan and Cromwell. And Sullivan and Cromwell is an old law firm that had started peddling its influence many years ago. Now, the things that they did during this time, getting letters from, as a Secretary of State, issuing letters on behalf of clients to governments to deal with with clients of Sullivan and Cromwell would be illegal today. No one ever talks about that.
But the thing is, and again, that's a very good point, because throughout history, our political leaders, in many cases, are under the thumb of business and economic leaders. So the same thing you say about the Dulles brothers, we could say about Vice President Cheney and Halliburton.
That's
And
correct.
so now when we look at foreign policy and we look at what the country is doing, is it in the interest of the general population, or is it in the interest of the economic people that our leaders represent? So the Dulles boys made sure that they took care of the interests of British Petroleum.
Absolutely. And
Dick
United
Cheney
Fruit,
made sure he took care of the interest of Halliburton.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, for every drop of blood Americans lost in the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
and for every drop of blood Americans lost elsewhere, might be some more money in the profit statement of those companies.
yes, yes. And for those that have watched this show, you know, we allude to the notion of the ugly American, which is a movie that I would film that I would certainly hope that members of our audience have seen or will see, because their American business has been at the forefront of every war that has happened in this country, every war. So it's a sad commentary on who we are that we tend not to want to deal with that. Now, I gave you that information on John Foster Dulles, and I want to talk a little bit, if I may, about the Middle East, because what is happening in the Middle East today.
Just one thing before you go to the Middle
Sure.
East, because this ties in the Middle East. The Russians, the Soviet Union, supported Syria in its independence movement against France. There was a communist party. I know it's hard to believe because it's a Muslim country,
Right.
but there was a strong communist party in 1946 in Syria. There was also a communist movement in Greece. That led to the president at the time, Truman, but the Foggy Bottom, which is the State Department, all Dulles and all those guys had influence to come up with the Truman Doctrine
Yes.
to stop communist aggression anywhere.
Yes.
So going way back, our foreign policy was to stem Russia, at that time the Soviet Union, from anywhere in the Middle East, anywhere in the Aegean Sea, anywhere there, and that is predicated, it influences later on our Middle East policy, so it ties right in.
It ties right in, and you mentioned Greece, and we all keep hearing about Greece and the economic problems that are happening in Greece. Greece is, and I know that we'll put this map up. You need to understand where Greece is and why it is so important.
Well, Greece is just at the point of the Aegean Sea into the Mediterranean Sea, so it's really a focal point for all of the major world trade. And the fact is that if Greece became communist, that the rest of the Balkans were communist at the time,
Mm-hmm.
the threat was that the Middle Eastern countries would become communist. There were communist parties in a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. Even in Israel there was a communist party. And this was a definite threat to the oil and the resources that the Western
That the
countries
Western powers
needed.
wanted control of. Let's talk a little bit when we talk about the Middle East. It's important because right now there is a presidential election happening in this country, and there was one candidate who has said some horrible things and has attacked a religion, and there seems to be a fervor, almost like the Red Scare, and that hysteria around that. If you see something, say something. I mean, that whole notion of, we're seeing a repeat of what happened after World War II with the Red Scare. So I want to talk a little bit about the Prophet Muhammad and the religion Islam. Prophet Muhammad is a descendant of Abraham, who was preceded by Moses and Jesus in the monotheistic tradition. He is no less important than Moses, no less important than Jesus. And he is a descendant of Abraham. Now, we did a show on that where we had Ishmael, who was Abraham's first son, and got a lot of flack from people about that because they just refused to acknowledge the fact that Ishmael is a descendant of Abraham. And of course, the Prophet Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael. So the Prophet Muhammad is regarded as the last prophet that God sent to mankind. Plain and simple. So you can't be someone having such negative feelings regarding Islam and the Prophet Muhammad and say, well, I am a follower of the Prophet Jesus, or I am a follower of the Prophet Moses, because they're all three on the same level playing field. And it is important for us to, and I think the disrespect that I hear happening against an entire religion is upsetting to me. I am someone who is of another tradition, and I would have a problem if Christians thought badly of my tradition, just as Christians would have a problem if Jews thought badly of their tradition. I don't know why, for some reason, there are some candidates out there who are making some very negative comments about Islam.
Well, it's scapegoating, and it's the same type of thing, as you said, as the Red Scare, or
Yes.
blaming the Jews in Nazi Germany for the economic problems there. It's called scapegoating in history, and it happens all the time. And what we have to do, and I think what you're doing with your show, Vivienne, is to educate people, not to scapegoat. Look at the facts, look at what history tells us, and make up your own mind. Nobody on this show or conversations
Right.
when we play characters it tells anybody what to think, but make up your own mind. But don't be scapegoated. Don't look at scapegoats. Don't look at false prophets, and don't look at simple solutions. And other than that, make up your own mind. Vote for whomever you want to vote for. But watch out for demagoguery, and watch out for the scapegoating.
And don't base it upon some information, some wrong information.
Exactly.
Now, within the Islamic faith are the Sunni and the Shia. Sunnis represent 85% of all people of the Islamic faith. They accept caliph status for any of the first four successors of the Prophet Muhammad. Shia followers only embrace and accept the bloodline of the fourth caliph as true heirs of the Prophet Muhammad. Accordingly, Muslims eligible to achieve caliph status must come from the bloodline of the fourth caliphate. Now, at this point, we want to explain to you what a caliphate is, because so many people don't understand, and they hear caliphate, and it's almost like they have a reaction that has no basis in reality. In order for there to be, first of all, a caliphate is a form of Islamic government. In order for there to be a caliphate, there has to be a caliph. Now, given that, do you have any questions about why? In fact, when you hear ISIS and ISIL talk about they're trying to establish a caliphate, have you ever heard any information regarding who the caliph is? And you cannot have a caliphate, without having a caliph.
That might be a good thing for, because they talk about the internet and how they recruit people on the internet. That might be a good point for our government to use to put on the internet for these potential converts who want to go to ISIS because they think they're helping to establish a caliphate, to know there's no caliph and there can't be any caliphate, so they're barking up the wrong tree. So that might be a good thing for the government to pursue.
I think you're right, and I wonder, that's something that the government needs to pursue, because the caliph is considered as the religious and political successor to the Prophet Muhammad. Now, let's get to what's going on today. Hussein bin Ali, and Hussein bin Ali is a direct descendant of the Prophet, or was a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. He was named to honor Hussein ibn Ali by his father Ali Pasha ibn Muhammad. It was Ali Pasha's belief that it was his son's destiny to reunite the conflicts plaguing Islam as a result of the Sunni and Shia division. Ali Pasha was a high-ranking official within the Ottoman Empire. And on your screen, you'll see the extension of the Ottoman Empire. But the Ottoman officials, while they gave Ali Pasha, which would have been Hussein bin Ali's dad, while they gave him a title and gave him jurisdiction over Mecca, which was a city, they did that because within the Muslim community, he was recognized as a leader, but the Ottomans didn't want to recognize him as a descendant of Muhammad. But he was named Hussein bin Ali lived from the years 1853 to 1931. And as I said, he was named to honor the 7th century Caliph Hussein ibn Ali, who lived 626 to 6.
So he could have been a caliph
He could have been a caliph. That's exactly right.
because he had all the hereditary background.
He did.
Exactly.
He did. And Hussein bin Ali was the son of the 4th Caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he was, this is interesting when you heard me talk about the Sunni and the Shia. This is interesting because he was a Sunni and he was the first imam of Shia Islam. He united the two. He was so revered that he formed the Shia sect of the Islamic faith. So now think about Hussein ibn Ali, who lived 626 to 680 AD, and his heir, Hussein bin Ali, who lived 1853 to 1931. He was a person that represented the Shia and the Sunni aspects of the religion. And this is why it was his destiny, and he was born to be the person who united the Shia and the Sunni divide within Islam. Now, at this point you have a map, and I want you to look at this map, which shows the Ottoman Empire. And if you look at that map, you will see how huge the territory that I have. You'll see how huge that territory is. Now, understand this. In 1915, the British dispatched High Commissioner Henry McMahon to meet with Hussein bin Ali. Hussein bin Ali at the time was the Sharif of Mecca. Remember, he represented the embodiment of Sunni and Shia. And he was an official in the Ottoman Empire, as his father had been before him. The Ottoman Empire was aligned with Germany. We're talking about the First World War. Understand that the British government knew there was a very tenuous relationship between the Muslims and France. There had always been a tenuous relationship. But so consequently, the French and the British got together, and they sent a British emissary, because they knew that the French there was a bad taste in the mouth of followers of Islam regarding France.
They didn't really trust the French.
They didn't trust the French. So the British had already established a relationship with King Faisal. And King Faisal and a young junior officer by the name of T.E. Lawrence assisted the British to get the reluctant Hussein bin Ali to meet with them. Now, remember during the show, we talked about
it, and people that saw the movie Lawrence Arabia will know
yes,
what you're talking about.
Hussein bin Ali was the Omar Sharif character.
Right.
And so he was not interested necessarily in meeting with the British because he had been aligned with the Ottoman Empire, which was Germany, which had been aligned with Germany, and the Ottoman Empire was essentially Turkey. So he met with Henry McMahon, and Henry McMahon claimed that he had authority to act on behalf of the British government. And McMahon negotiated the cooperation of Hussein to incite an Arab revolt against the authority of the Ottoman Empire. Now, if you know anything about warfare, and you're looking at the map, you've had to look at the map, you can understand that if Germany is allied with the Ottoman Empire, and you can convince a large population within the Ottoman Empire to revolt against the Ottoman Empire, what does that mean Germany has to do?
There was perfect strategy, and the central powers were the Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany, and by doing this, by having this internal revolt, they couldn't focus their attention on fighting the Allies, and what it really did is eventually led to Germany's defeat in World War I.
And the promises that were made to Hussein bin Ali in order to get him to turn against the Ottoman Empire, who was his employer at the time, was that they would establish a caliphate. Now, and if you look at the map and you see the territory that was going to be given to the caliphate stretched from North Africa up through the Middle East and to the Mediterranean, all the way to Iran. That was land that was going to be given to the caliphate.
In fact, in the Republican debate the other night, Ted Cruz referred to that when he talked about the deal with Iran, how bad it was, and how Russia, Iran, and the other countries are thinking to expand. And he didn't use the word caliphate, but that's what he was talking about, right through the same area that you're talking about.
Yes. And that was land that was promised to Hussein bin Ali at the end of the First World War. That's something that really I want to make sure. Look at the map, understand what would have happened if Britain had lived up to its obligations to Hussein bin Ali. What would the world look like today?
And the point you make about what Britain did and by reneging on the agreement, the end of World War I, yes, and the Treaty of Versailles, and how the Middle East was portioned off, how the Balkans were portioned off with the idea that President Wilson had of self-determination, led to many, many of the problems we're having today, because you cannot draw lines and satisfy every national or ethnic group. So even today you have the Kurds who are in Iraq and Syria, but they want their own country, and you have other ethnic groups in different countries, and it led to World War II, where the Germans were in Czechoslovakia. So that settlement and the mental state that caused that settlement was the same ideology that they had towards Ben Ali, because they said, we made a deal, so what? This is not in our interest, that the deal's off the table.
And something interesting about that, because at the same time that they were making that deal with Hussein bin Ali, there was a commodity that was becoming very much important. We talked about that.
Three-letter word, not
yes,
a four-letter word.
Three-letter word. Three-letter word. We talked about that, and the fact that Winston Churchill, as Lord of the Admiralty, had persuaded Great Britain that it was in their interest to stop using coal as an energy form, which Britain had lots of coal, but to switch to oil to power its ships because it was more efficient and it allowed the ships to move faster. So you can understand that in 1905, Great Britain already knew that they had a need of oil for their navy. And in 1915, they dispatched an emissary to negotiate with Hussein bin Ali, because the land that the caliphate would have occupied would have been oil rich. And that was not in Britain's best interest. So I talk about that as betrayal, and to just bring it back around, John Foster Dulles was one of the architects of the Treaty of Versailles. You have heard, if you're a regular viewer of this show, you have heard us talk about the fact that the Treaty of Versailles set the stage, necessarily had to set the stage for World War II. Now, what you're seeing is that along with that, there were resources that were so important to Western interests, and they had no intention, they never intended to honor the agreement they had with Hussein bin Ali. So when you start to hear about what's going on in the Middle East, what Russia's doing that's crazy, Russia has invested money in Syria for access to warm water since 1946. I wanted to say, we said 1971, they actually started forgiving debt to allow the dredging.
Yeah, and they also supported Syria when they revolted for their independence from France, so they go way back. And to, like, people are blaming Obama for Putin being in Syria. It goes before Obama was born, even before Putin was born. Right. Almost before I was born.
So with that, it's our hope that we have given you some information that will allow you to hear, to listen, and be able to ascertain misinformation that you are being fed on a regular basis. And guess what? This only happens on Conversations Across Time. Tune in next week, and hopefully when you've had an opportunity to review all the maps that we put up, you will have clarity in terms of what is going on in today's political climate.
Conversations across time. Conversations across time.